Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, Saylor and Lex Friedman engage in a thought-provoking discussion on economics, inflation, and the unseen forces shaping our financial world. Saylor does a great job in challenging mainstream ideas, exploring the complexities of inflation, asset dynamics, and the consequences of currency expansion.
I'm really shocked today that the entire mainstream dialogue of economics has been captured by scalar arithmetic. For example, if you read, read any article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, right? They just refer to there's an inflation number or the CPI or the inflation rate is X. And if you look at all the historic studies of the impact of inflation, generally they're all based upon the idea that inflation equals CPI, and then they try to extrapolate from that, and you just get nowhere with it.
So at the very least, we should be considering inflation and other economics concept as a nonlinear dynamical system. So nonlinearity, and also just embracing the full complexity of just how the variables interact, maybe through simulation, maybe have some interesting models around that.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if somebody for once published a table of the change in price of every product, every service, and every asset in every place over time?
You said table. Some of that also is the task of visualization, how to extract from this complex set of numbers patterns that somehow indicate something fundamental about what's happening. So like summarization of data is still important. Perhaps summarization not down to a single scalar value, but looking at that whole sea of numbers, you have to find patterns. Like what is inflation in a particular sector? What is maybe change over time? Maybe different geographical regions, things of that nature. I think that's kind of, I don't know even what that task is. That's what you could look at machine learning. You can look at AI with that perspective, which is like, how do you represent what's happening efficiently as possible? That's never going to be a single number, but it might be a compressed model that captures something beautiful, something fundamental about what's happening.
It's an opportunity for sure, right? If we take, for example, during the pandemic, the response of the political apparatus was to lower interest rates to zero and to start buying assets, in essence, printing money. And the defense was there's no inflation. But of course, you had one part of the economy where it was locked down, so it was illegal to buy anything. Like you couldn't, it was either illegal or it was impractical. So it would be impossible for demand to manifest. So of course, there is no inflation. On the other hand, there was instantaneous, immediate inflation in another part of the economy. For example, you lower the interest rates to zero. At one point, we saw the swap rate on a 30-year note go to 72 basis points. Okay, that means that the value of a long-dated bond immediately inflates. So the bond market had hyperinflation within minutes of these financial decisions. The asset market had hyperinflation. We had what you call a K-shaped recovery, what we affectionately call a K-shaped recovery. Main Street shut down, Wall Street recovered all within 6 weeks. The inflation was in the assets, like in the stocks, in the bonds. If you look today, you see that typical house, according to the Case-Shiller index today, is up 19.2% year over year. So if you're a first-time home buyer, the inflation rate is 19%. The formal CPI announced is 7.9%. You can pretty much create any inflation rate you want by constructing a market basket, right? A weighted basket of products or services or assets that yield you the answer. I think that, the fundamental failing of economists is first of all, they don't really have a term for asset inflation. right?
What's an asset? What's asset hyperinflation? You mentioned bond market, swap rate, and asset is where the majority of the hyperinflation happen.
Yeah.
What's inflation? What's hyperinflation? What's an asset? What's an asset market?
And
I'm going to ask so many dumb questions.
In the conventional economic world, you would treat inflation as the rate of increase in price of a market basket of consumer products, defined by a government agency.
So they have like traditional things that a regular consumer would be buying. The government selects like toilet paper, food, toaster, refrigerator, electronics, all that kind of stuff, and it's like a representative basket of goods that lead to a content existence on this earth for a regular consumer.
They define a synthetic metric, right? I mean, I'm going to say you should have 1,000 square foot apartment, and you should have a used car, and you should eat, 3 hamburgers a week. Now, 10 years go by, and the apartment costs more. I could adjust the market basket by they call them hedonic adjustments. I could decide that it used to be in 1970 you needed 1,000 square feet, but in the year 2020 you only need 700 square feet because we've miniaturized televisions and we've got more efficient electric appliances, and because things have collapsed into the iPhone, you just don't need as much space. So now it may be that the apartment costs 50% more, but after the hedonic adjustment, there is no inflation because I just downgraded the expectation of what a normal person should have.
So the synthetic nature of the metric allows for manipulation by people in power.
Pretty much. I guess my criticism of economists is rather than embracing inflation based upon its fundamental idea, which is the rate at which the price of things go up, right? They've been captured by mainstream conventional thinking to immediately equate inflation to the government-issued CPI or government-issued PCE or government-issued PPI measure, which was never the rate at which things go up. It's simply the rate at which a synthetic basket of products and services the government wishes to track go up. Now, the problem with that is two big things. One thing is the government gets to create the market basket, and so they keep changing what's in the basket over time. So, I mean, if I said 3 years ago, you should go see 10 concerts a year, and the concert tickets now cost $200 each. Now it's $2,000 a year to go see concerts. Now I'm in charge of calculating inflation. So I redefine, your entertainment quota for the year to be 8 Netflix streaming concerts. And now they don't cost $2,000. They cost nothing. And there is no inflation, but you don't get your concerts, right? So the problem starts with continually changing the definition of the market basket. But in my opinion, that's not the biggest problem. The more egregious problem is the fundamental idea that assets aren't products or services. Assets can't be inflated.
What's an asset?
A house, a share of Apple stock, a bond, a Bitcoin is an asset, or a Picasso painting. So,
not a consumable good, not an apple that you can eat.
Right. If I throw away an asset, then I'm not on the hook to track the inflation rate for it. So what happens if I change the policy such that, let's take the classic example, $1 million bond at a 5% interest rate gives you $50,000 a year in risk-free income. You might retire on $50,000 a year in a low-cost jurisdiction. So the cost of Social Security or early retirement is $1 million when the interest rate is 5%. During the crisis of March of 2020, the interest rate on a 10-year bond went to 50 basis points. Okay, so now the cost of that bond is $10 million. Okay, the cost of Social Security went from $1 million to $10 million. So if you wanted to work your entire life, save money, and then retire risk-free and live happily ever after on a $50,000 salary, living on a beach in Mexico, wherever you wanted to go, you had hyperinflation. The cost of your aspiration increased by a factor of 10 over the course of, some amount of time. In fact, in that case, that was like over the course of about 12 years, right? As the inflation rate ground down, the asset traded up. But the conventional view is, oh, that's not a problem because it's good that it's good that the bond is highly priced because we own the bond. Or what's the problem with the inflation rate in housing being 19%? It's an awful problem for a 22-year-old that's starting their first job, that's saving money to buy a house. But it would be characterized as a benefit to society by a conventional economist who would say, well, housing asset values are higher because of interest rate fluctuation, and now the economy's got more wealth. And so that's viewed as a benefit.
So what's being missed here, like the suffering of the average person, or the struggle, the suffering, the pain of the average person, like metrics that captured that within the economic system. Is it when you're talking about
one way to say it is a conventional view of inflation as CPI understates the human misery that's inflicted upon the working class and on mainstream companies by the political class. And so it's a massive shift of wealth from the working class to the propertied class. It's a massive shift of power from the free market to the centrally governed or the controlled market. It's a massive shift of power from the people to the government. And maybe one more illustrative point here, Lex, is what do you think the inflation rate's been for the past 100 years?
Are we talking about the scalar again?
If you took a survey of everybody on the street and you asked them, what do they think inflation was? What is it? You remember when Jerome Powell said our target's 2%, but we're not there? Mm. If you go around the corner, I have posted the deed to this house, sold in 1930. Okay, and the number on that deed is $100,000, 1930. And if you go on Zillow, mm-hmm. and you get the Z estimate.
Is it higher than that? No.
$30,500,000.
Yeah.
So that's 92 years, 1930 or 2022. And in 92 years, we've had 305x increase in price of the house. Now, if you actually back calculate, you come to a conclusion that the inflation rate was approximately 6.5% a year, every year, for 92 years. Okay, and there's nobody in government, no conventional economist that would ever admit to an inflation rate of 7% a year in the US dollar over the last century. Now, if you dig deeper, I mean, one guy that's done a great job working on this is Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and he notes that on average, it looks like the inflation rate and the money supply is about 7% a year, all the way up to the year 2020. If you look at the S&P index, which is a market basket of scarce desirable stocks, it returned about 10%. If you talk to 10% a year for 100 years, the money supply is expanding at 7% 100 years. If you actually talk to economists or you look at the economy and you ask the question, how fast does the economy grow in its entirety year over year? Generally about 2 to 3%. Like the sum total impact of all this technology and human ingenuity might get you a 2.5%, 3% improvement a year. As
measured by GDP. Is that are you okay with that?
I'm not sure I'd go that far yet, but I would just say that if you had the human race doing stuff,
yeah,
and if you ask the question, how much more efficiently will we do the stuff next year than this year, or what's the value of all of our innovations and inventions and investments in the past 12 months, you'd be hard pressed to say we get 2% better. Typical investor thinks they're 10% better every year. So if you look at what's going on, really, when you're holding $1 million of stocks and you're getting a 10% gain a year, you really get a 7% expansion of the money supply. You're getting a 2 or 3% gain under best circumstances. And another way to say that is, if the money supply stopped expanding at 7% a year, the S&P yield might be 3% and not 10%. It probably should be. Now that gets you to start to ask a bunch of other fundamental questions, like if I borrow $1 billion and pay 3% interest and the money supply expands at 7 to 10% a year, and I ended up making a 10% return on a $1 billion investment paying 3% interest, is that fair? And who suffered so that I could do that? Because in an environment where you're just inflating the money supply and you're holding the assets constant, it stands to reason that the price of all the assets is going to appreciate somewhat proportional to the money supply. And the difference in asset appreciations is going to be a function of the scarce desirable quality of the assets, and to what extent can I make more of them, and to what extent are they truly limited in supply.
Yeah, so we'll get to a lot of the words you said there, the scarcity, and so connected to how limited they are, and the value of those assets. But you also said, so the expansion of the money supply, which is, put another way, is printing money. And so is that always bad, the expansion of the money supply? Is this just to put some terms on the table so we understand them? You nonchalantly say it's always on average expanding every year. The money supply is expanding every year by 7%. That's a bad thing. That's universally a bad thing.
It's awful. Well, I guess to be precise, it's the currency. Money. I would say money is monetary energy or economic energy. And the economic energy has to find its way into a medium. So if you want to move it rapidly as a medium of exchange, it has to find its way into currency. But the money can also flow into property, like a house or gold. If the money flows into property, it'll probably hold its value much better. If the money flows into currency, right? If you had put $100,000 in this house, you would have 305x return over 92 years. But if you had put the money, $100,000 in a safe deposit box and buried it in the basement, you would have lost 99.7% of your wealth over the same time period. So the expansion of the currency creates a massive inefficiency in the society, what I'll call an adiabatic lapse. It's what we're doing is we're bleeding the civilization to death. Right?
What's the adiabatic? What's that word? That's
adiabatic lapse.
Adiabatic.
Right. In aerospace engineering, you want to solve any problem, they start with the phrase, assume an adiabatic system. And what that means is a closed system.
Okay.
So I've got a container, and in that container, no air leaves and no air enters, no energy exits or enters. So it's a closed system.
So you got the closed system lapse.
Okay. What's a closed? Okay. I'm going to use
there's a leak in the ship.
I'm going to use a physical metaphor for you because you're into jiu-jitsu, right? Like you got 10 pints of blood in your body. Mm-hmm. And so before your next workout, I'm going to take 1 pint from you. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to go exercise, but you're 1 pint. You've lost 10% of your blood. Okay. You're not going to perform as well. It takes about 1 month for your body to replace the red blood platelets. So what if I tell you every month you got to show up and I'm going to bleed you?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm draining the energy, I'm draining the blood from your body, you can't perform. Adiabatic lapse is when you go up in altitude. Every 1,000 feet, you lose 3 degrees. You go at 50,000 feet, you're 150 degrees colder than sea level. That's why you look at your instruments and instead of 80 degrees, you're minus 70 degrees. Why is the temperature falling? Temperature's falling because it's not a closed system, it's an open system. As the air expands, the density falls, right? The energy per per cubic whatever, falls, and therefore the temperature falls, right? The heat's falling out of the solution. So when you're inflating, let's say you're inflating the currency supply by 6%, you're sucking 6% of the energy out of the fluid that the economy is using to function.
So the currency, this kind of ocean of currency, that's a nice way for the economy to function. It's the most kind of it's being inefficient when you expand the money supply, but it's the liquid. I'm trying to find the right kind of adjective here. It's how you do transactions at a scale of billions.
Currency is the asset we use to move monetary energy around, and you could use the dollar, or you could use the peso, or you could use the bolivar.
Selling houses and buying houses is much more inefficient, or like you can't transact between billions of people with houses.
Yeah, properties don't make such good mediums of exchange. They make better stores of value, and they have utility value if it's a ship or a house or a plane or a bushel of corn, right?
So, what do you think about this Bitcoin discussion? Do you agree with Michael Saylor's arguments and claims? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, keep learning and keep stacking.